July 17, 1816. The Atlantic Ocean, off the coast of Mauritania. A French frigate named Medusa is sinking. Not because of a storm, not because of enemy fire, but because of one man's pride. Just a few weeks earlier, in the port city of Rochefort, the Medusa had departed with great ceremony. Flags waved. Speeches echoed. The monarchy had returned, and this mission, reclaiming the colony of Senegal, was meant to show the world that France was back. On board, over 400 people. Government officials eager to prove their worth. Soldiers, doctors, and engineers. Families, servants, and crew members. All trusting that the ship and its captain would carry them safely across the ocean. But the captain, Hugues Duroy de Chaumaris, was not a man of the sea. He had been away from the Navy for over 2 decades, yet was given command not because of skill, but because of politics. Loyalty to the crown was more important than competence. From the very beginning, things went wrong. Chaumaris ignored his own officers. He dismissed the experienced sailors. And worst of all, he handed control of navigation to a man who couldn't even read charts correctly. As the Medusa drifted closer and closer to the African coast, experienced crew members warned him, "The water is too shallow, the sandbanks here are deadly." He didn't listen. And on July 2, 1816, the Medusa struck a sandbank. The ship was stranded. And that is where the nightmare began. Now, let's pause. Because up until now, this may sound like just another forgotten shipwreck. One more tragedy lost in the waves of history. But here's the real question. How do these events, this failure, this chaos, this human suffering, become one of the most political paintings in the history of art? A painting so raw, so brutal, that it shocked the French elite, and shook the foundations of an entire empire. You might have seen it without knowing what it truly shows. A raft. Dead bodies. A pyramid of survivors clinging to hope. They call it the Raft of the Medusa. But what you're about to hear is what that painting doesn't tell you. When the Medusa struck the sandbank off the coast of Africa on July 2, 1816, it didn't feel like disaster at first. The impact was sudden, but not violent. The ship didn't break. It simply stopped moving. But within hours, it became clear they were stuck. The tide wouldn't lift them. The ship was going nowhere. And worse, there were no nearby ports. No backup. No help. The officers met in private. They had to act fast. But they were not experienced seamen. The captain, Hugues de Chaumaris, hadn't commanded a ship in over 20 years. Most of the crew had been appointed by political favor, not maritime skill. And now, nearly 400 people were stranded on a ship slowly breaking apart. There were 6 lifeboats, enough for maybe 250 people, if packed tightly. But even that was optimistic. The officers made a choice, quietly and deliberately. The governor, soldiers, nobles, and officers were given seats in the boats. A few select civilians joined them, friends, wives, children. The rest? Too many. Too poor. Too ordinary. They couldn't be taken. But they couldn't be left on the ship either. It was breaking apart. So an idea emerged, a raft. A crude, flat platform. No shelter. No navigation. Just wood, rope, and empty barrels lashed together. It was never designed to carry people, only supplies. But desperation rewrote the rules. 147 people were forced onto the raft, packed shoulder to shoulder. No space to sit, no room to move. They were promised, "We'll tow you to shore with the lifeboats." At first, the lifeboats tried. But the raft was heavy. It dragged and slowed the boats. Panic spread among those in the lifeboats. They feared the raft would sink them too. So, without warning, someone gave the order. The ropes were cut. The raft, with 147 souls, was set adrift. Alone. No compass. No anchor. No food or water, except a few barrels of wine and biscuits. What happened next would haunt every witness forever. When the ropes were cut and the raft drifted away, no one looked back. The lifeboats vanished over the horizon, and 147 souls were left floating on an unstable patchwork of wood and rope. They had no oars, no compass, no anchor, and above all, no plan. For the first few hours, silence. The kind of silence that comes when panic hasn't fully arrived yet. But then came the waves. Sudden, aggressive. The raft, heavy and low, rocked violently. People fell. Some slipped between the cracks and vanished into the sea. 12 were lost by nightfall. Their supplies? Mostly ruined. Wine barrels had been smashed or swept overboard. The few remaining biscuits were soaked in salt water, turning into inedible paste. There was no fresh water. Only a handful of men had weapons. None had leadership. Then came the heat. The sun blistered skin and opened wounds. Salt rubbed into every cut like sandpaper. Some tried to drink seawater. Within hours, they were delirious, hallucinating, screaming, clawing at the air. One man leapt into the sea, convinced it was a garden. Another tore off his clothes and declared himself the King of France. By the third day, reason began to dissolve. The officers could no longer command the crowd. A new group formed, a ring of the strong. They claimed the center of the raft, where it was driest. They controlled what little food remained. And they decided who lived, and who was taking up too much space. The sick and the weak were pushed toward the edges, then into the water. By the fifth day, death was no longer shocking. The raft had become quiet again. But this time, it was not peace. It was acceptance. When the sun rose that morning, some bodies were missing. But no one had seen them go overboard. No one asked. No one needed to. Because that was the morning, when the raft began to feed on itself. By day 6, the raft was no longer a raft. It was a battlefield, a floating arena where reason had drowned and only instinct remained. The strong dominated. They rationed meat, human meat, cut from the bodies of the fallen. Some refused at first. They prayed. They cried. But by the 7th day, everyone ate. It wasn't a decision anymore. It was survival. There were no longer names, just roles. Some guarded the food. Some stood watch at night, armed with knives made from splintered wood. Some simply waited, hoping not to be next. On day 8, a group attempted escape. Using wood from the raft, they tried to build a smaller platform. They were stopped and killed. Another group plotted mutiny. They wanted to seize control, take the food, and cast the officers overboard. They were caught and executed on the spot. By day 10, only about 30 people remained. The others, dead, drowned, eaten, forgotten. Madness became normal. A man spent an entire night talking to a corpse. Another stared at the sun until he went blind. 2 men fought over a button. Yes, a button, because it looked like gold. Some sat in silence, rocking back and forth. Others screamed for hours, then never spoke again. By the 12th day, even the killers had nothing left to kill. The raft was quiet again. Only the wind and the sound of waves. And then, a shadow on the horizon. A ship. The Argus. It almost didn't see them. But a torn piece of cloth, waved weakly by the last survivors, caught a sailor's eye. And on the 13th day, after nearly 2 weeks of floating through hell, 15 people were rescued. When the 15 survivors were brought back to France, they weren't welcomed as heroes. They were seen as an embarrassment. The monarchy, already struggling to appear competent after Napoleon's fall, wanted the story buried. Official reports were altered. The captain, Hugues de Chaumaris, was tried, but received only a slap on the wrist. A short prison sentence. He never set foot on a ship again, but he also never truly paid the price. But the survivors talked. They gave testimonies. Newspapers caught the story. The French public was horrified. One man, however, didn't just read the headlines. He felt the story. His name was Theodore Géricault. Young, wealthy, rebellious, and deeply disillusioned with the politics of his time. He didn't paint to flatter. He painted to expose. Géricault spent months interviewing the survivors. He sketched their faces, asked about the smell, the heat, the screams. He visited morgues to study decomposing flesh. He even built a life-size model of the Raft in his studio. For over a year, he painted obsessively, silently, alone. In 1819, he unveiled the result, the Raft of the Medusa. It was massive, over 16 feet wide. No divine light, no glory, only death, despair, and one fragile triangle of human hope, just barely rising from the wreckage. Audiences were shocked. Some turned away in disgust. Others stood frozen. Many saw not just a raft, but a mirror of failure, of injustice, of who is saved and who is left behind. It was not just a painting, it was a scream, and it still echoes today.